You've found nightfall murmurs. When day fades into silence, the world begins to whisper. Some stories come as murmurs, some as warnings, but they all come at night. Don't be afraid to listen, but never listen alone. The deed to Blackwood Manor arrived last autumn, a thick vellum envelope delivered by courier containing the pronouncement from my solicitor. A distant kinsman, a name familiar only from genealogical charts, had bequeathed the estate to me, Elias Thorne, a phantom benefactor I'd never encountered in life. Elation, sharp and bright, pierced me initially. Such a sprawling property promised untold possibilities, renovations perhaps, or a lucrative sale. Yet, upon arrival, threading myself into the fabric of the place, a different awareness began to dawn. Whispers seemed to skitter down hallways devoid of breeze. Doors eased open or shut with spectral deliberation, and an immutable sensation of not being solitary settled deep within my bones. Dismissal was my first defense, attributing the phenomena to an overtaxed mind. But the occurrences persisted, relentless, undeniable. Now the pretense shatters. Something stirs within these walls when darkness falls, and sometimes, brazenly, under the indifferent gaze of day, malice. I cannot yet discern its intent, but its proximity constricts my chest, a cold fist tightening with every sensed movement. My arrival was bathed in the deceptive warmth of an afternoon sun hanging high in a cerulean vacancy. The approach unfurled as a long, shadowed lane, flanked by sentinel trees whose branches interlaced overhead, filtering the light. At its terminus stood the manor, a brooding silhouette against the sky, its grandeur diminished by time's relentless siege. Paint curled away from weathered timbers like sunburnt skin. Moss, vibrant and green, crept possessively around the stone foundations. Stepping from the automobile, the silence struck me, profound, absolute. No birdsong, no rustle of wind, merely the stark punctuation of gravel crunching beneath my soles. Retrieving my valise from the boot, I ascended the worn front steps. Inside, the foyer yawned, larger than anticipated, dominated by a wide, curving staircase ascending into shadow. Tall, mullioned windows lined the walls, their panes grimy, admitting shafts of sunlight thick with dancing dust motes. Floorboards groaned a mournful protest under my weight. The air hung heavy, stale, imbued with the scent of years sealed away from the world. A cursory exploration of the ground floor revealed cavernous rooms draped in funereal white sheets, a vast drawing room haunted by the shapes of entombed furniture, a dining hall centered by a massive scarred table of dark wood, its surface subtly warped. One door opened onto a rear passage leading to a kitchen seemingly frozen in a bygone era. Archaic appliances gleamed dully. Countertops bore stains like old wounds. Returning to the echoing foyer, I hefted my luggage and climbed the creaking stairs in search of lodging. Upstairs, a corridor stretched away, punctuated by closed doors. Near the far end, one yielded to reveal a spacious bedchamber with an adjoining bath. A skeletal wooden bed frame dominated the room, its mattress shrouded in a thick shroud of dust. Time bled away as I worked, wiping down surfaces grimed with neglect, sweeping drifts of particulate matter, coaxing open windows to admit a draft of fresher, living air. Amidst this domesticity, faint sounds drifted up from below, Soft rhythmic impacts, like hesitant footfalls. An errant creature, perhaps, a stray cat or squirrel having found ingress. I descended quickly, scanning the foyer, the drawing room. Nothing. No scurry, no scrape. The emptiness pressed in again, palpable. I retreated upstairs. That night found me eschewing the dubious mattress for a simple cot erected in the bedchamber, illuminated by a portable lamp. The room's overhead fixture sputtered erratically, unreliable. Sleep beckoned early, around 10. My thoughts bent on the organizational tasks awaiting dawn. Yet midnight jolted me awake, heart hammering against my ribs. I sat bolt upright, straining my ears. There they were again, footsteps, distant yet distinct, possessing a steady cadence, the sound of someone pacing methodically down a long hall. My mouth went dry, tension coiled in my arms. Switching on the lamp's beam, I crept to the door, pressing my ear against the cool wood, attempting to triangulate the source. They seemed to emanate from the right, further down the corridor. Easing the door open, I was met with profound darkness, pierced only by the narrow beam of my phone's flashlight. Nothing. I advanced slowly, the light sweeping across floorboards and peeling wallpaper. My pulse throbbed in my ears. Glances thrown over my shoulder revealed only empty space, yet the fear of seeing a shape coalesce in the gloom remained sharp. Reaching the corridor's end, I checked a small guest room. Vacant, windows sealed, curtains hanging limp and still. I stood there, catching my breath, the only sounds my own ragged respiration and the faint electronic hum from my phone. The footsteps had ceased. Shaking my head, attempting to dispel the unease, I returned to my room, secured the lock, and collapsed onto the cot. Sleep was a reluctant visitor, finally taking me only through sheer, bone-deep exhaustion. Morning light did little to dispel the night's lingering chill. Rationalizations surfaced, echoes perhaps of my own movements, or the groans and sighs of an old structure settling its ancient bones as temperatures fluctuated. Yet a persistent tension remained lodged between my shoulder blades. The day was consumed by further cleaning, inspections of the antiquated electrical system, fuse boxes like museum pieces, lights that flickered ominously or refused illumination altogether. I meticulously noted necessary repairs. In the upstairs gallery, I paused before the rows of ancestral portraits. Stern figures in stiff attire stared out from shadowed canvases, their painted eyes seeming to track my progress. Touching a heavy gilt frame, the wood felt unnaturally cold beneath my fingertips, coated, like everything else, in a fine film of dust. A profound disquiet settled over me. I forced my attention back to practicalities. Around 2 in the afternoon, the resonant slam of a door echoed up from the ground floor. I startled violently. Leaving the gallery, I hastened downstairs to find the massive front door agape, despite my certainty of having secured it earlier. The breeze outside seemed far too gentle to have forced it. My heart rate quickened, a clammy dampness slicked my palm. I pulled the door shut once more, testing the lock. It felt loose, worn. As a precaution, I wedged a heavy hall chair beneath the knob. Later, drawn by a need to understand the history contained within these walls, I ventured into the study, situated at the first floor's far end. Towering bookshelves, heavy with dusty tomes, lined the room. Near the window stood a substantial mahogany desk. Upon its surface lay scattered papers, old correspondence, and a leather-bound ledger. The ledger chronicled household expenditures, notations regarding staff wages, the final entry, dated decades prior, penned in a precise, unchanging hand. Sifting through the letters revealed mostly mundane affairs, invoices, business dealings, interspersed with personal notes hinting at gatherings held on the estate. The descriptions were veiled, alluding to private conclaves and nocturnal discussions. Unease prickled my skin again. No overt mention of the supernatural, yet a peculiar undertone resonated in the phrasing. References to observances, pledges, words imbued with a formality bordering on the ceremonial. As dusk bled across the sky, I retreated to the kitchen for a meager supper. Supplies brought from town yielded a simple sandwich and a glass of water drawn from the tap. The plumbing functioned, though the water carried a faint metallic tang. Another item for my growing list of concerns. I ate quickly, anxiety a knot in my stomach. Mid-chew, a low murmur reached my ears, seeming to emanate from the house itself. Not a voice I could place, yet undeniably speech, hushed and sibilant. Swallowing hastily, plate still in hand, I moved out of the kitchen, seeking the sound's origin. It seemed strongest near the dining room hallway. The light switch there proved useless. The bulb was dead. I stood at the threshold, listening, my legs feeling strangely weak, my stomach clenching. The murmuring persisted for several heartbeats, then abruptly ceased. I advanced slowly down the darkened passage, phone flashlight reactivated, the chill of the floor seeping through my socks. Peering into the dining room, I saw only the sheet-draped specters of chairs surrounding the great table. Nothing stirred. The tall windows threw back my light, reflecting a pale, wide-eyed face, my own. "Hello?" My voice sounded thin, swallowed by the space. Silence answered. I edged further in, gripping the phone tightly, scanning corners, behind heavy curtains, beneath the table. Emptiness. The house held its breath, but my pulse continued its frantic rhythm. Sweat trickled down the back of my neck. This pervasive dread was new territory. Old houses held quirks, but this one radiated a constant, low-level menace. Ascending the stairs once more, I locked myself within the bedroom's relative sanctuary. Resuming my perusal of the discovered letters, I found more unsettling fragments, descriptions of gatherings that, while perhaps framed as small parties, lacked any sense of casual celebration. They spoke of repeated rituals, the writer stressing the imperative of secrecy. Mention was made, too, of a specific room located in the basement, a region of the house I had yet to brave. The mere thought of descending into that subterranean darkness sent a tremor through me, shortening my breath, yet the knowledge demanded investigation. Sleep that night was a fragmented affair. Every creak, every settle and groan of the old structure snapped me upright on the cot. Shadows seemed to deepen and shift just beyond the door. Soft, intermittent tapping sounds materialized, their source maddeningly elusive. My body remained rigid with tension, the phone clutched like a talisman. Eventually, oblivion claimed me for a scant few hours. The following day dawned with grim resolve. The basement must be explored. Delaying until evening felt unwise. The stronger light of late morning offered a sliver of courage. I located the basement door near the kitchen, secured by a lock whose key resided on a ring found within the study desk. Turning the key, I pushed the door inward and flicked on the single naked bulb dangling over the stairwell. The wooden steps protested my descent with loud groans. Damp, cool air enveloped me, raising gooseflesh on my arms. At the bottom, a concrete floor stretched away, the walls lined with dusty shelves holding forgotten tools, dried paint cans, cleaning detritus, and stretches of emptiness. A narrow corridor branched off to the left, terminating in another closed door. Approaching it, my heart hammered a frantic beat against my ribs. Turning the knob, I pushed the door open onto a cramped, narrow room. The meager light from the corridor barely penetrated the gloom, necessitating the flashlight's beam. Inside, a few simple wooden chairs stood arranged in a rough circle. At the circle's center rested a plain wooden stand bearing an empty, shallow bowl. Closer inspection revealed markings etched directly into the concrete floor, intricate patterns of concentric circles interwoven with sharp, intersecting lines. Kneeling, I traced one with a fingertip. The groove felt rough, deliberately carved with some sharp implement. These were no random scratches, they bespoke intention, design. Standing abruptly, a suffocating pressure built in my chest, my breathing shallow. An inescapable conviction settled. This space had been used, consecrated for some form of ceremony. Images flooded my mind. Figures seated in those chairs, passing the bowl, their voices lowered in chants or whispers. The nature of their rites remained obscure, yet the lingering atmosphere felt far from benign. I retreated hastily, pulling the door shut, locking it firmly behind me, resolving to leave it sealed unless necessity dictated otherwise. That afternoon, seeking respite and clarity, I walked the grounds. The rear gardens were a tangle of overgrown grass and towering, untrimmed hedges. A dilapidated greenhouse listed to the west, its glass panels mostly shattered, framing skeletal remains within. Gazing back at the manor, it stood silent, impassive, its windows reflecting the vast, empty sky like vacant eyes. A chill traced its way down my spine, despite the afternoon sun. A decision loomed: hire renovators, attempt to purge the decay, or sell the burden as it stood. Yet an intuition whispered that extricating myself would not be so straightforward. I placed a call to a contractor I knew, arranging for him to assess the structure in the coming days. He agreed, albeit with caveats about his packed schedule. The prospect of another person present, even briefly, offered a modicum of comfort. Alone in this place, nervousness warred with a stubborn determination to comprehend the forces at play. Night fell again, and again I woke, this time not just to footsteps, but to heavier treads, accompanied by a faint grating scrape, like wood dragged across wood. Rising, flashlight in hand, I forced myself to open the bedroom door. The corridor lay steeped in darkness, but near the gallery entrance, a flicker of movement snagged my eye. My heart leapt into my throat. Slowly, stealthily, I moved toward the area. A shape, distinctly human-like in silhouette, materialized at the corridor's end, only to vanish around the corner. I froze, caught between the instinct to flee and the compulsion to follow. Thoughts raced, my own breathing loud in the suffocating silence. Propelled by a mixture of terror and morbid curiosity, I forced my legs to move, feeling weak-kneed, my palms slick with cold sweat. Reaching the junction where the figure had disappeared, I heard the soft click of a closing door, though discerning which one was impossible in the gloom. I checked 3 nearby doors, a linen closet, a small lavatory, a storage room filled with discarded furniture, all empty. I stood there, the flashlight beam trembling in my grasp. The air felt perceptibly colder. The limits of my courage had been reached. Further searching in the oppressive darkness was untenable. Retreating to my room, I slammed the door shut, wedged the chair back under the knob, and sank onto the cot, waiting for morning. My chest remained tight, a dull ache beginning behind my temples from the unrelenting stress. The sensation of being watched, observed from within the very walls, intensified. I strained to hear further sounds, but only a profound silence answered. I remained thus, vigilant and barely blinking, until the first gray light of dawn seeped through the dusty windows. The following morning, I packed a small overnight bag. Another night alone in Blackwood Manor was inconceivable without reinforcement. My plan crystallized: drive into the nearest town, secure lodging at a motel, and return later, perhaps with someone, the contractor, anyone, who could lend support, bear witness. Locking the heavy front door behind me felt like shedding a physical weight. The constriction in my chest eased fractionally. Settling into the car's driver's seat, I cast one final look back at the brooding edifice. A part of me yearned to sever all ties, to simply drive away and never return. Yet the weight of inheritance, of responsibility, remained. Whether the path forward involved sale, restoration, or a deeper, more perilous investigation, I knew my return was inevitable. But for now, escape was paramount. Turning the ignition key, the engine catching felt like a small victory. I drove away, each mile unfurling between me and that silent, watchful place, loosening the knots of tension in my shoulders. Though the unease lingered, a cold shadow clinging to the edges of my mind. The road had bled the energy from me, hours dissolving into hypnotic stretches of asphalt until my eyes felt like sandpaper. Utterly spent, I surrendered when the skeletal structure of a motel materialized beside the desolate highway, decrepit, undeniably. But the promise of stillness, of a horizontal reprieve from the relentless forward motion, eclipsed all aesthetic concerns. I cut the engine, the sudden silence profound, and pushed myself out into the cool night air. The reception area was a cramped, sterile box, smelling faintly of bleach and despair, occupied only by a gaunt figure behind a high counter. The night clerk, presumably. He slid a key across the worn laminate without preamble, his voice a dry rasp mentioning checkout formalities, before he retreated back into the shadows and whatever task held him captive there. Indifference suited me. Exhaustion craved only passage. My assigned space resided near the terminus of a long, dim corridor, its window overlooking a barren expanse of cracked asphalt, bathed in the sickly amber luminescence of a solitary sodium lamp. I turned the key, the lock yielding with a weary click, stepped over the threshold, and secured the deadbolt behind me. A small ritual of imagined safety. The room offered Spartan comforts, a bed sagging slightly in the middle, a scarred dresser, a television bolted high on the wall like a watchful eye, wallpaper patterned with faded, indeterminate flora curled away from the plaster near the ceiling like sunburnt skin, the air thick with the lingering ghost of industrial disinfectant, couldn't quite conquer an underlying mustiness. Still, it was refuge. My duffel bag hit the thin carpet with a thud. Shoes kicked off, I inhaled deeply, the tension in my shoulders easing fractionally. Release. A shower felt imperative, a way to sluice off the miles and the grime. Flicking the switch, the bathroom light stuttered, buzzed, then settled into a harsh fluorescent glare. I twisted the chrome faucet, letting the water drum against the fiberglass tub, waiting for warmth. And then I noticed it, nestled beside the sink, a tiny, precise perforation in the drywall, no bigger than a pencil's diameter, yet perfectly circular, unnervingly deliberate. It seemed to pierce straight through to the adjacent room. Leaning closer, I peered into the small darkness. An artifact of clumsy renovation, perhaps? A forgotten drill hole never patched? Yet its neatness felt wrong, too clean-edged for accidental damage. It wasn't error, it was intent manifested in plaster. Unease, a cold knot forming low in my stomach, prompted me to tear off a wad of tissue and cram it firmly into the aperture. A crude fix, but it occluded the view. I showered with hurried, jerky movements, the prickling disquiet refusing to wash away with the soap. Wrapped in a threadbare towel, back in the main room, the silence felt amplified. I switched on the television, seeking refuge in canned laughter and predictable plots, settling for some flickering black and white sitcom. But my focus fractured, my gaze drifting involuntarily towards the closed bathroom door. That hole, an insistent presence. A sound, so soft it was almost subliminal, a hesitant tap, tap, against the dividing wall, seemingly emanating from the bathroom. I went rigid, the sitcom chatter fading to meaningless noise. My pulse hammered against my ribs. Silence descended again, thick and watchful, broken only by the television's electronic hum. Minutes stretched, imagination surely. Road fatigue playing tricks, the groans of an old building settling. I forced a slow breath, commanding my muscles to unclench. Thump, louder this time, definitive. A chill traced a path down my spine. Logic warred with a rising dread, but dread won. I rose, limbs stiff, crossed the room, and pushed open the bathroom door. The harsh light illuminated the familiar scene. Sink, toilet, shower, with one stark alteration. The tissue I'd wedged into the hole was gone, simply vanished. My breath hitched. Someone on the other side had removed it. A void opened in my thoughts, replaced by the frantic drummer in my chest. Trembling fingers fumbled for more tissue, packing it into the void with desperate force. Backing away, I tried to rationalize, to dismiss, but the feeling persisted, sharp and undeniable. I was being observed. I retreated from the bathroom, pulling the door shut, and perched on the edge of the bed, eyes locked on the flimsy barrier, waiting, listening. Then a new sound, a faint, dry skittering, like fingernails testing the texture of the wall. Against all instinct, compelled by a morbid curiosity, I returned, opened the door, looked. The tissue plug, again, was absent. My insides turned to ice. My hands shook violently. I pressed my ear flat against the cool plaster, straining to catch the slightest whisper, the faintest breath from the other side. Nothing. Absolute silence. Slowly, deliberately, I backed out, closed the bathroom door, and this time turned the lock. The click echoed unnaturally loud. I sat on the bed again, hugging myself, trying to shrink. It was nothing. An old motel, strange drafts, maybe even rodents. Plausible deniability fought a losing battle against raw fear. Every creak of the building, every distant rumble of a truck on the highway became magnified, sinister. The sensation of an unseen gaze intensified, pressing in from the periphery. The television droned on, unnoticed. Worst-case scenarios bloomed in the darkness behind my eyes. The spectral attendant, a hidden guest, something not entirely human. Just as a fragile calm threatened to settle, it came again. A soft, insistent scratching, measured, purposeful, like something patiently wearing away the barrier between us. I sat bolt upright, heart seizing. Checking again felt like madness, like inviting disaster, yet the not knowing was intolerable. Taking a ragged breath, I forced myself to stand, to approach the locked bathroom door. My hand, slick with sweat, fumbled with the knob. Turning it, pushing inward. The hole gaped, dark and empty. The tissue gone. A vacant eye staring back from the wall. Air refused to enter my lungs. The pounding in my chest became a physical pain. I retreated, stumbling back to the bed, collapsing onto the thin mattress. The feeling of being hunted, of being watched by something just beyond the plaster, was suffocating. I remained there, rigid, eyes fixed on the locked bathroom door, every nerve ending alight. I didn't know what form the intrusion would take. Would it come through the wall, through the window, through the main door? But I felt its presence, circling, patient. The long hours until dawn were a torment spent in hypervigilance. Sleep was an impossibility. Every shadow seemed to deepen. Every sound promised menace. Trapped, alone with the unseen watcher. When the first weak fingers of gray light finally probed through the gap in the curtains, it was a signal for escape. I snatched my duffel bag, heart still hammering a frantic rhythm, and bolted from the room, abandoning any thought of checkout procedures or returning the key. Outside, the cool morning air felt like a physical release. I scrambled into my car, hands trembling on the steering wheel, and accelerated away, tires spitting gravel. I didn't glance in the rearview mirror, didn't slow until the motel was a forgotten speck miles behind me. Only then did the knot in my chest begin to loosen, allowing shallow breaths. But the feeling lingers, a cold residue, the certainty of being watched. Roadside motels are now alien territory, haunted by the memory of that room, that perfect dark hole. And the chilling knowledge persists. Whatever waited on the other side of that wall, patient and unseen, is likely waiting still. Waiting for the next weary traveler to seek refuge, to discover the tiny aperture, and to wonder, perhaps too late, what happens when the scratching stops. The spectral flicker on the monitor wasn't supposed to show movement, not from the old kingdom amphora, but there it undeniably was, a silent, impossible slide across its pedestal between heartbeats of the recording. The sight sent a chill through me, colder and deeper than the museum's regulated air. Little did I grasp that this minute, aberrant motion was the prelude to a nocturnal ordeal, poised to shatter my grasp on the tangible world, blurring the ancient dust with the immediate present. For half a year, these echoing halls had been my domain after dark. Elias Thorne, doctoral candidate by daylight, sentinel of antiquities by night. The position suited my scholarly needs, offering quietude for poring over ethnographies. The true challenge, usually, was simply commanding wakefulness amidst the profound stillness. But this night would unravel that familiar quiet. The shift commenced as always. 10 o'clock brought the handover from Mariana, the day warden, followed by my initial ennui. The museum breathed a particular kind of silence then, vast and sepulchral, the artifacts casting elongated skeletal shadows under the sparse emergency lighting. I'd convinced myself I was inured to its inherent eeriness, a foolish assumption. Nearing midnight, while observing the grid of surveillance feeds, an anomaly snagged my focus. The camera trained on the Nile Valley exhibit revealed its crown jewel, a ceremonial vessel, 4,000 years etched into its quartzite form, distinctly jolted perhaps an inch to the sinister. I blinked, rubbed tired eyes, rewound the digital stream, and there it persisted. One frame, the amphora perfectly centered, the subsequent frame displaced. Impossible, I breathed, the sound absorbed by the console's low hum. I knew that exhibit intimately. The vessel was substantial, shielded securely behind layers of reinforced glass. It possessed no volition, no mechanism for movement. A glitch, I reasoned, a phantom woven by the camera's electronic eye. Verification was necessary. Yet, as I navigated towards the Egyptian wing, a peculiar pressure began to build in the atmosphere, a tangible charge akin to the pregnant air preceding a violent storm. The corridor seemed to stretch, the silence amplifying. Initially, the gallery appeared as I'd left it. The amphora sat upon its plinth, hieroglyphs glinting faintly, serene in its ancient repose. But advancing closer, the unsettling truth struck. Its orientation was different. The painted Wedjat eye, Horus's unblinking stare that typically commanded the room's center, was now canted fractionally, gazing towards the darkened western wall. An icy current snaked down my vertebrae, my rational dismissal, my certainty. Three nights hushed into the Holloway place, and the scraping began. Whispers against the glass, I told myself initially, skeletal fingers of wind-rattled branches, or perhaps the furtive scuttling of mice, endemic to timbers steeped in age. Plausible deniability served until dawn revealed ragged furrows clawed deep into the front door's wood, raw wounds exposing paler grain beneath. Security, I realized with a cold jolt, was no longer optional. My quest for fortification led me to Thorne's provisions, a relic breathing dust and history, likely coeval with the town's first stones. An antique bell above the door chimed my entrance into air, thick with the tang of oiled steel and dry lumber. Aisles, narrow canyons choked with paint tins and spades and shadowed tools, snaked through the gloom, each surface filmed with neglect. Presiding over this domain, behind a counter scarred by decades of commerce, stood Silas Thorne. His face, a roadmap of wrinkles, mirrored the store's venerable decay. His hands spoke of labor, calloused and sure. He regarded my approach with eyes like chips of flint. his expression a locked door itself. "A deadbolt," I ventured, aiming for nonchalance despite the tremor in my voice. Something robust. The shift in him was palpable, instantaneous. His posture stiffened, the flint in his eyes hardening into something sharp, almost accusatory. "We don't stock those," he stated flatly, his gaze unwavering. "Not for newcomers." A beat of silence stretched, thick with unspoken things. "I'm sorry." "Locks," Silas Thorne enunciated, each syllable weighted, deliberate as a hammer blow. "Not for sale to anyone not of this place. It's ordnance." A disbelieving laugh escaped me, sharp and nervous in the quiet store. "Ordnance? Surely you jest. I own the Holloway place now down on Elm Lane." His gaze narrowed, dismissive. "Ownership confers little. You aren't woven in. Nails, wire, paint. Help yourself. But locks? Prohibited." "Prohibited?" My voice rose despite myself. "It's fundamental safety. How can you prohibit a lock?" He leaned across the counter then, his weathered hands flat upon the wood, a gesture both intimate and profoundly threatening. "Heed this. This town breathes by its own rhythms, its own necessities. Outsiders remain unlocked for our safety." My skin tightened, prickling with a sudden chill. "Yours? What about mine?" A flicker of something unreadable, pity, weariness, crossed his face. "Time reveals," he murmured, the softness more chilling than his earlier brusqueness. "Or you depart, most depart." Retreating from the counter, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach, I clung desperately to the idea of perverse local humor, a twisted hazing ritual for the uninitiated. Yet conviction, born of those gouges in my door, drove me onward. The neighboring town yielded a formidable deadbolt and reinforcing plates, tangible defiance against archaic superstition. My haven would remain inviolate. That evening, twilight bleeding into ink, I worked by the porch light, the drill biting into wood, the screws turning home. A prickling awareness crawled up my spine, the unmistakable, ancient sensation of unseen scrutiny. Repeated glances through the windows revealed only velvet blackness, indifferent trees standing sentinel against the void. Nonetheless, the feeling persisted, heavy as the humid air. I was observed. Midnight chimed from a distant steeple, heralding the return of the scraping, amplified now, insistent, clawing. It migrated, a frantic circuit from door to window panes and back again, testing, probing each potential ingress with unnerving intelligence. Double-checking the new lock became ritual before I huddled in the living room's inadequate light, straining to interpret the nocturnal orbit of something circling my walls. Dawn brought fresh wounds around the doorframe, gouges angrier, deeper than before, accompanied by a slip of coarse paper thrust beneath the door. Crude, shaky script commanded, "Take it off." I crushed it in my fist, fuel for my dwindling resolve. Mere intimidation tactics, I told myself fiercely. Yet the siege intensified nightly. The scraping grew frenzied, desperate. Notes materialized with unnerving regularity on my doorstep. Remove the lock. A warning. Unsafe. Sleep became a fragmented luxury, afforded only under the stark glare of every light bulb in the house. Nerves frayed thin by each creak and groan of the old structure. Then the knocking commenced. Not the casual rap of a visitor, but a measured, percussive tattoo, migrating methodically. Door, window, door. A relentless circuit beginning precisely at the witching hour of 3, ceasing only with the first pale hint of dawn. Peering out through slivers in the blinds, revealed nothing but empty lawn and shadow. Yet the rustle of movement just beyond the walls, the susurrus of voices hovering just below the threshold of comprehension, were undeniable, chilling realities. A week fractured by sleeplessness and this relentless auditory assault shattered my defiance. I found myself once more beneath the jangling bell of Thorne's provisions, the scent of dust and metal cloying in my throat. Silas Thorne regarded my haggard appearance without a flicker of surprise, as if my return was foreordained. "Prepared to yield?" he inquired sans preamble. "Explain this," I pleaded, my voice rough, alien to my own ears. "Why is a simple lock forbidden here?" He exhaled slowly, the sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement, seeming to age years in that single instant. "Certain doors are best left unbarred. The town requires passage. It is the established way, necessary." Passage? The word felt thick, obscene on my tongue. To my home? For what earthly reason? Silence answered me, heavy and profound, accompanied only by his unwavering, faded gaze that seemed to see straight through my fear to the exhaustion beneath. Finally he spoke, his tone low, almost gentle. "Depart, while departure remains an option." That night, the assault shifted tactics, becoming terrifyingly focused. The rhythmic patrol ceased, replaced by a furious, unyielding battery upon the front door alone. It hammered, relentless, demanding, shaken the very frame of the house, and the whispers coalesced, rising from indistinct murmurs into chilling, undeniable clarity. Let us enter. We must come inside. You are obliged to admit us. Terror pinned me against the vibrating wood, tremors racking my frame as if I myself were under attack. The deadbolt, bless its metallic soul, held firm, yet the surrounding frame groaned, protesting, beginning to splinter under the sheer, focused onslaught. Whatever entities besieged my home, the lock enraged them, transformed their persistence into fury. Near dawn, an abrupt, unnerving silence fell, more shocking than the preceding cacophony. I waited, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, long after the sun's first weak rays pierced the gloom, before daring to draw back the curtain. The porch stood vacant beneath the bruised morning sky, but etched savagely into the wood directly above the defiant lock, like a brand, were 2 words. Final notice. Surrender came with the exhausted light. My hands trembled violently, betraying me as I fumbled with the screwdriver, the small metal tool feeling impossibly heavy as I undid my brief, futile act of rebellion. As the final screw relinquished its hold, dropping with a soft clink onto the porch boards. A subtle sound, the crunch of gravel on the driveway, made me turn, muscles tight with apprehension. Silas Thorne stood sentinel at the edge of my drive, observing, his expression unreadable, but for a faint hint of something akin to approval. "A prudent decision," he remarked, his voice carrying easily in the still morning air. A curt nod accompanied his words. "Rest will come easier now." "What is this town?" The question tore from my raw throat, ragged with sleeplessness and fear. Where is it forbidden to secure one's own door? A thin, enigmatic smile touched his lips, offering no answers, only deepening the mystery. He turned then, without another word, and melted back into the quiet street, leaving me alone with my violated sanctuary. That night descended into an unnerving tranquility. No scraping claws, no percussive demands, no sibilant voices plagued the darkness. Yet this profound silence was more terrifying than the siege had ever been, pregnant with the absolute, chilling certainty that my home was now permeable, accessible at any moment to whatever lurked outside. The knowledge was a cold weight settling deep in my gut. The following day, the "For Sale" sign hammered into the lawn felt like raising a white flag over a conquered territory. The realtor, a woman with weary eyes that suggested she'd overseen many such retreats, registered my decision with resignation, not surprise. "Any other listings?" I asked numbly, scanning the peaceful, deceptive street. She offered a strange, pitying glance. "None active. Newcomers don't stay long. They all find their reasons to leave eventually. Those who resist," she added softly, her gaze distant, "who insist on barring the way, they seem to depart most abruptly." I retreated to the sterile anonymity of a motel in the adjacent town, awaiting the inevitable sale. It concluded with unsettling swiftness, the deed passing to established local residents, a detail that seemed to ripple quiet satisfaction through the unseen fabric of the community. On the day I loaded the last of my belongings into a rented truck, eager to put miles between myself and the oppressive atmosphere of Elm Lane, Silas Thorne materialized once more beside the vehicle, a spectral figure against the mundane backdrop. "Certain thresholds demand openness," he stated, his voice low and resonant, carrying the weight of ancient law. "Certain doors reject the key. Carry that knowledge with you." I fled to the concrete embrace of the metropolis, a place where locks are not questioned but expected, where steel and alarms offer the comforting illusion of sanctuary. Yet memory is a persistent haunting, sometimes adrift in the deep, anonymous hours of the urban night, or a faint or scratch seems to echo at my heavily secured door, and cold dread whispers through the chambers of my mind. Did they follow? I picture that shadowed town, perhaps another hopeful newcomer settling into the old Holloway place, blissfully unaware, soon to learn the unwritten statutes, the terrible price of defiance. Each night, before sleep claims me, my fingers trace the familiar contours of deadbolts and chains, a ritual of reassurance in a world suddenly grown vast and uncertain. Though deep within, a treacherous thought persists, insidious as the whispers I fled. Perhaps some locks don't keep things out. Perhaps they only trap you within. Or worse, perhaps they merely announce your resistance, drawing unwelcome attention to a door that was always meant to remain open. The placid surface of my holiday shattered the instant the couple at the adjacent table ceased to exist. One moment, etched in the opulent glow of the ship's dining saloon, the next, merely vacant chairs and starched linen. The turquoise escape I'd craved felt suddenly, irrevocably deeper, darker. I hadn't foreseen this, trading my pressure cooker career in predictive analytics for a voyage straight into a predator's hunting ground, a floating island where smiles masked secrets and the vast ocean promised absolute discretion. My name is Julian. I'd chased the siren song of a Caribbean cruise, envisioning 7 sun-drenched days as an antidote to algorithms and market volatility. The brochure depicted serenity itself, sapphire waves kissing a pristine hull, cocktails sweating under a benevolent sun. What I found was an undertow of terror that would cling to my memory like salt spray. The initial days unfolded true to the fantasy, indolent hours by the crystalline pool, the clink of ice in evening glasses, the practiced charm of the ship's entertainers. It was the third night, amidst the clatter of silverware and the murmur of contented diners, that the idyll began to fray. I was navigating a perfectly cooked filet mignon, exchanging pleasantries with the silver-haired pair sharing my table, with my attention snagged on a couple 2 tables away. They were young, sharp-edged in their tailored clothes, caught in the teeth of a silent argument. Her gestures were tight, furious flicks of the wrist. His gaze darted, a trapped animal seeking escape routes. A commonplace spat, I assumed, the friction of proximity on vacation. I finished my meal, the scene fading, and sought the manufactured thrill of the casino, the chime of slots a temporary solace. Morning brought the dissonance. At breakfast, their table stood conspicuously empty, chairs tucked in with impersonal precision. My eyes swept the bustling room. Perhaps they'd simply chosen a different view. No sign. "Pardon me," I ventured, addressing our steward, a man whose smile seemed permanently affixed. "The couple seated there last night. Have you seen them this morning?" He blinked, a flicker of incomprehension crossing his features. "I'm afraid that table was unoccupied yesterday evening, sir. It hasn't been assigned." Ice, sharp and sudden, pricked my veins. I knew they were there. The tension between them had been palpable, a low hum beneath the dining room's orchestrated harmony. It wasn't imagination. Throughout the day, a growing unease shadowed me. I scanned faces on the deck, in the lounges, seeking their distinct profiles. This vessel, though immense, felt suddenly finite. People didn't simply dematerialize mid-voyage, did they? That evening, nursing a drink at the Meridian bar, fragments of hushed conversation drifted towards me, chilling as the condensation on my glass. "Did you hear?" one woman breathed, leaning close to her companion. "Another pair vanished. That makes 3 couples now." My head jerked up. "Excuse me," I interjected, my voice tighter than intended. "You mentioned people missing." 2 pairs of eyes swiveled towards me, widened with apprehension. "Oh, it's likely just talk," the first woman demurred, attempting a casual wave. "You know how rumors fly on these cruises." But the fear beneath the surface was undeniable. This wasn't shipboard gossip, it was a contagion of dread. The remainder of the night became a quiet, desperate excavation. I drifted between conversations, piecing together whispers and fragmented accounts. In the preceding 48 hours, 3 separate couples had apparently dissolved into the sea air. No record of disembarkation, their cabins discovered undisturbed, possessions arrayed as if awaiting their owner's imminent return. The ship's personnel presented a united front of polished ignorance. An inquiry directed at a uniformed security man met a smooth, rehearsed deflection about respecting guest confidentiality. Sleep became an impossibility. My thoughts churned, a frantic attempt to impose logic on the inexplicable. In the pre-dawn stillness, I found myself pacing the deserted promenade deck, the wind cool, the waves whispering below, and then I saw him, a figure near the stern railing, straining with a significant weight. The shape was long, distressingly pliant, wrapped in dark canvas, sickeningly reminiscent of a body bag. I instinctively shrank behind the bulk of a lifeboat, my heart hammering against my ribs. With a final, grunting heave, the figure tipped its burden overboard. A dull splash echoed, quickly swallowed by the ocean's vastness. The man scanned the shadows, a furtive, practiced movement, before melting back into the ship's labyrinthine corridors. My own limbs felt leaden, unresponsive. Trembling fingers fumbled for my phone, the emergency number for ship security half-dialed when a hand clamped brutally over my mouth. A poor decision, that. A low voice vibrated against my ear. Cold steel pressed insistently into the small of my back. A knife. Propelled by the blade, I was steered back towards my cabin, the suffocating pressure of the hand never easing. Inside, my captor spun me around. Recognition hit me like a physical blow. He was one of the ship's officers. Thorn, his name tag read, immaculate in his crisp whites. "You observed something not meant for public consumption," he stated, his tone unnervingly level, "which presents us with a logistical issue." Who are you?" The question escaped, or thin and reedy. "Those couples, what did you do?" A smile touched his lips, but left his eyes glacial. "Consider me part of the sanitation crew, removing certain undesirable elements. We strive for a flawless guest experience, you understand." Nausea churned within me. This man, sworn to passenger safety, was the architect of these vanishings. The motive remained horrifyingly opaque. "You're deranged," I whispered, stumbling backwards until the cabin wall met my shoulders. "You can't just erase people. They'll be missed." He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that scraped against my nerves. "People vanish constantly. Unfortunate accidents at sea, deeply regrettable, but the schedule remains. The ship sails on." The chilling implication hung in the air. This was routine. How many voyages? How many souls consigned to the depths? "Now," he continued, the knife describing lazy arcs in the air, "the question is, what arrangement shall we make for you?" Panic surged, sharpening my senses. Escape or become the next unfortunate accident? My eyes darted, searching for leverage, a weapon. Just then, The ship's mighty horn bellowed its deep, resonant call, a scheduled signal that momentarily startled us both. Seizing the fractional lapse in his attention, I lunged for the heavy lamp on the nightstand, swinging it with desperate force. It connected with Thorn's temple with a sickening thud. He crumpled, the knife skittering across the carpet. I didn't pause. I bolted from the cabin, feet pounding the plush corridor carpet, adrenaline screaming through my system, towards the central atrium, towards authority, towards help. But a paralyzing realization dawned. Who was safe? If Thorn, an officer, was the monster, how deep did the complicity run? Could the entire crew be players in this grotesque theater? I burst into the reception area near the purser's desk, breath tearing at my lungs. "Help me!" I gasped out. "There's a killer on this ship. He's making people disappear." The woman behind the polished counter regarded me with carefully modulated concern. "Sir, please, try to be calm. What seems to be the trouble?" I tried to articulate the nightmare, words tumbling over each other in a frantic, incoherent cascade. But her expression shifted subtly, doubt clouding her professional sympathy. I sounded unhinged. I knew it. "Sir, perhaps you should accompany me," she suggested, her voice gentle yet firm. "We have medical staff available." "No, you don't understand," my shout echoed, drawing curious glances. "He'll kill us all." A firm hand settled on my shoulder. I spun, fists clenched, bracing for another attack, but found myself facing the stern, authoritative visage of the ship's captain. "Is there a problem here, mister?" My explanation died before it began. Positioned just behind the captain, observing me with cold, murderous intent, stood Officer Thorn. A makeshift bandage adorned his temple. In that instant, the terrifying isolation crashed down. It was my fractured narrative against their unified, uniformed denial. They controlled the ship, the narrative, everything. There was only one path left. I ran. Shoving past the startled captain, I sprinted, heedless of the shouts erupting behind me, the thud of pursuing footsteps, up stairwells, through lounges, bursting onto the windswept upper deck. The night air was a shock, cold and clean. Ahead lay the railing, dark water churning far below. In the space of a heartbeat, I made the calculation, the unforgiving ocean versus the certain death waiting behind me. I vaulted over the side. The impact stole my breath, icy water engulfing me. I fought my way to the surface, gasping, watching the constellation of the ship's lights recede into the immense darkness. Survival felt improbable, adrift in the cold Atlantic, yet infinitely preferable to remaining aboard that vessel of horrors. Floating between hope and oblivion, a chilling thought surfaced. How many other gleaming white ships plied those waters, their luxurious decks concealing similar darknesses? How many other predators moved among the carefree crowds, selecting their next victim from the midnight buffet line? A fishing trawler plucked me from the waves hours later, hypothermic but alive. My story, however, founded on the rocks of disbelief. The cruise line issued swift, categorical denials, portraying me as disturbed, a troubled soul who'd suffered a breakdown and leaped overboard. But the truth remains branded on my soul. Years have passed, yet every glossy advertisement for a seaborne vacation sends a shiver down my spine, because I know sometimes the monster isn't lurking in the depths below, but standing beside you at the railing, offering a charming smile, waiting. So, before you book that passage to paradise, consider my voyage. Ask yourself if you're prepared for the isolation, the vulnerability, trapped miles from shore with nowhere to turn. Because once the land disappears over the horizon, you are utterly reliant on the humanity of those who share the endless blue with you. And sometimes, that humanity is terrifyingly absent. Dust motes danced like phantoms in the weak shafts of light piercing the subterranean gloom of the municipal archives, a Tuesday evening bleeding into oblivion. Down here, the air was a palpable entity, thick and stagnant, tasting of decay and forgotten ink. My task, assigned by Miss Thorne with casual indifference, was to sift through generations of neglected file boxes, consigning the deemed worthless to oblivion. Yet a reluctance stayed my hand. Discarding history unseen felt like a minor sacrilege. It was this hesitation that led me to it. A simple shoebox nestled amongst crumbling ledgers, filled not with paper, but with cassette tapes. Mundane artifacts, perhaps personal relics of some long-departed clock. Then, my eye snagged on a label, handwritten, stark against the plastic. March 14th, 2026, a date suspended impossibly in the future, mocking the present year of 2025. The tape felt unnaturally heavy in my palm. A knot tightened low in my gut. Heat prickled the back of my neck. An error, surely. A misprint. A practical joke left to ripen in the dark. I willed myself towards dismissal. Still, propelled by a disquiet I couldn't name, I carried the cassette towards the cramped, forgotten office, tucked away at the basement's far reach. There, coated in the sedimentary dust of years, sat an antiquated tape player. My fingers trembled slightly as I coaxed open the deck. The hinges emitted a thin, protesting shriek. The tape slid home. Play. A hiss of static surrendered to a voice that coiled around my own vocal cords, unmistakably mine. "I'm standing in the corner of my living room," it murmured, intimate and strange, trying to decide if I should answer the phone. The disembodied monologue meandered through the utterly banal, mentioning the specific Sumatran blend I'd only begun brewing the previous week, confessing an anxious flutter about an upcoming departmental presentation. It concluded with a casual note about a minor power disruption expected at my apartment complex. Around 9, it specified, the following evening. My mouth was parchment. A vice clamped around my ribs. Was reason fraying at the edges? I scanned the claustrophobic office, half anticipating a hidden camera, a grinning colleague leaping from the shadows. Silence answered. Only me, the wheezing machine, and the impossible tape. I ejected it, turned it over and over, the label stubbornly proclaiming its futuristic provenance. March 14th, 2026. Over a year hence. It just sounds like me, I reasoned, a flimsy shield against the encroaching dread. Back in my apartment that night, the recorded words echoed relentlessly. Dinner was a blur, the television a meaningless flicker. Anxiety, cold and insidious, seeped into my bones. The tape, the voice, the date, a maddening loop. As the clock crept towards 9, my gaze became magnetically drawn to its digital face. 9:03 p.m., lights blazing. Relief washed over me, sharp and giddy. I laughed, a hollow sound in the quiet room. spooked by a dusty relic. Then, at 9:07 p.m., the apartment plunged into blackness, a brief, absolute void before the power snapped back, bathing the room in sudden, stark light. 10 seconds, perhaps less, a flicker, just as the voice had foretold. I remained frozen, staring at the illuminated ceiling fixture, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, sweat beading on my brow. The cassette hadn't lied. Not a catastrophic blackout, just precise. My hands shook. I paced the confines of my living room for what felt like an eternity, grasping for logic, for coincidence, for anything other than the chilling truth tightening its grip. Morning found me descending the stairs back into the archive's stale embrace. Routine tasks felt distant, unimportant. My attention kept snagging on the shoebox, a Pandora's container I both feared and craved. Surrender came swiftly. I examined the other cassettes. Dates stretched months, years into the future. Some bore no date, only cryptic inscriptions in what was undeniably my own script, though I held no memory of writing them. The meeting, the car, the leak. A tremor started deep in my chest, vibrating up into my throat. Lips dry, I selected the tape labeled "The Meeting" and fed it to the player. Again, my voice, eerily familiar yet detached, filled the small office. It spoke of an impending summons by Ms. Thorne, the head archivist. It detailed her attire, a charcoal blazer. It described the new project I'd be assigned, the precise wave of frustration that would wash over me. The recording culminated with a resigned finality. I walk out of that room, knowing I can't escape this situation. Gooseflesh prickled my arms. The wall clock showed nearly noon. Ms. Thorne had indeed requested my presence at 1, a discussion about quarterly planning. A hollow feeling bloomed in my chest. A high-pitched whine seemed to fill my ears. Ignore it, I commanded myself. See what unfolds. At 12:50 p.m., I ascended to her office, palms slick against the stair railing. The meeting commenced precisely at 1. She wore the charcoal blazer. Restructuring, she announced. A more demanding role for me. A new project. Every syllable, every detail. A perfect echo of the tape. I walked out feeling precisely as predicted. Cornered, weary, trapped. Back in the basement's oppressive quiet, the fluorescent lights above buzzed and flickered erratically. A prickle of unease traced my spine. Was I being observed? The heavy metal door groaned shut behind me, amplifying the silence. The shoebox sat accusingly on the desk. The urge to destroy the tapes warred with an insatiable need to understand. A cold knot formed in my stomach as I selected another cassette. This one marked simply "Work." My voice issued forth again, narrating the immediate future. A minor spat with Gareth from acquisitions over misfiled dockets. A scalded hand from the temperamental coffee machine. And then, something truly unsettling. The discovery of a hidden passage in the basement, leading to a forgotten storage sector. My breath hitched. No such passage existed, surely. Yet the tape insisted I would stumble on a loose floor tile, brace myself against the far wall, and trigger a hidden mechanism. The wall would swing inward, revealing an older, untouched part of the archives. Doubt warred with the chilling accuracy I'd already witnessed. The following day, while wrestling with brittle folders, Gareth appeared, irritation etched on his face. A box I'd processed was incorrectly labeled, disrupting his inventory. We exchanged terse words. A minor skirmish, insignificant, yet perfectly aligned with the recording. A tremor ran through me. Later, seeking caffeine, I approached the break room's sputtering machine. A burst of scalding water splashed my left hand. I recoiled, cursing, the sharp sting instantly recalling the tape's prediction. Cold water did little to quell the rising panic. Focus became elusive. That afternoon, laden with binders, navigating the uneven floor, my foot caught on a protruding tile. I lurched forward, binders threatening to scatter. My hand shot out, palm slamming against the concrete wall for balance. A faint click resonated. The section of wall beneath my hand yielded, shifting inward perhaps 2 inches. My heart leaped, lodging itself in my throat. Tentatively, I pushed again. The wall pivoted silently on concealed hinges, releasing a gust of air thick with the scent of ancient dust and mildew. Darkness yawned beyond. Retrieving a heavy-duty flashlight from a nearby shelf, I aimed its beam into the void. Rows upon rows of decaying crates, rusted metal shelving piled high with forgotten records, stretched into the gloom. A chamber untouched, archaic. In a far corner, a dilapidated desk surfaced in the light, a broken chair beside it, and upon the desk, another cassette player, different model, older, layered in dust. Nudging the ruined chair aside, a profound tightness constricted my chest. I lifted the player. Its power cord was dangerously frayed. Beside it lay a small stack of unlabeled tapes, identical in brand to those in the shoebox. Adrenaline surged, hot and electric. My head felt light, my breathing shallow. What secrets lay buried here? A wave of vertigo washed over me. Turning abruptly, I fled the secret room, pulling the hidden door closed until it clicked shut, my hands trembling against the cold, unyielding surface. Seated at my usual workstation, I fought to regain composure. The tapes weren't suggestion, they were script. My voice, my future, laid bare on magnetic tape. Denial was no longer an option. My heart hammered against my ribs. Rummaging through the shoebox, I counted them. 20 tapes in total. Dates scattered across the coming weeks, months, years. Cryptic phrases hinting at unknown events. One tape bore today's date. The label simply read, "Today." My temples throbbed as I slid it into the player, bracing myself. My voice, tinny and strained, emerged from the static. "I'm standing in the basement," it said, "around 5 in the afternoon, too scared to open the next door. I keep checking the corridor to make sure I'm alone. I feel my heart pounding. I listen to the recording of myself describing these exact actions. I realize I can't avoid the next step. I stabbed the pause button. The clock on the wall read 4:55 p.m. My chest vibrated with a terrifying resonance. Teeth clenched, I pressed play again. I know I can't throw these tapes away. I'll try to figure out who made them or why they exist, but I'm afraid of what I'll discover next. Silence. The tape ended. My mouth tasted like copper. Blood pounded in my ears. Swiftly, mechanically, I wrapped the tapes in discarded newsprint, grabbed the player from the hidden office, and stuffed everything into my duffel bag. A final, furtive glance down the empty corridor, and I hurried up the stairs, bursting out into the fading daylight. The drive home was a study in tension, the bag on the passenger seat radiating a palpable menace. My shoulders ached, my jaw clamped shut. Focus on the road, I told myself, but the disembodied voice, my voice, replayed, relentless. Inside my apartment, locks clicked, windows double-checked. The cassette player sat accusingly on the kitchen table. One part of me screamed to hurl it all into the nearest dumpster, sever the connection. Another part, insidious and compelling, needed to know. Hands shaking, sweat tracing paths down my temples, I selected a tape labeled "Next Week." Crackle, hiss, then my voice, detailing a chance encounter at the supermarket with Simon, an old college acquaintance I hadn't seen in years. We would discuss, the tape foretold, structural issues with the archives building's foundation. I listened, rapt, pulse accelerating, as it described a small fissure near my basement desk I hadn't noticed. It concluded, "I realize these tapes are controlling me, but I can't stop listening." I snapped the player off, breath coming in ragged gasps. The compulsion was undeniable, a magnetic pull towards foreknowledge, however terrifying. Days bled into one another, each marked by the chilling fulfillment of prophecy. The supermarket encounter unfolded verbatim. Simon materialized by the cereal aisle, recognized me instantly, inquired about my work, casually mentioned the perils of aging foundations. I stood gripping the shopping cart, hands clammy, heart hammering. Event after event clicked into place, minor and major, exactly as dictated by the tapes. Sleep offered no refuge, shattered by nightmares, by the phantom echo of my own voice predicting the dawn. At work, every creak and groan of the old building sent jolts of paranoia through me. The thought of confiding in someone felt impossible, ludicrous. Who would believe such a story? The tapes accumulated in my apartment, a growing testament to my fractured reality. Each one played in secret, my recorded voice narrating conversations yet to happen, habits yet to form, events yet to transpire. And so I sit here now, chronicling this descent. Tapes remain, promising glimpses further down the timeline. The one labeled, "1 year from now, you'll," lies untouched, radiating a cold terror. My legs tremble beneath the table, my hands are icy. Part of me yearns for answers, for the origin of this impossible loop. Another part fears that listening seals my fate, beans me irrevocably to the path laid out. My heart pounds a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I stare at the pile of cassettes. Tomorrow I will return to that hidden chamber, search for a clue, a name, a photograph, anything to explain how my voice became unstuck in time. Nausea churns at the prospect, yet avoidance feels futile. The tapes chart my course, unerringly accurate. The memory of that first playback, my own voice describing an event hours before it happened, remains vivid, impossible, yet undeniably real. Each fulfilled prediction tightens the chains. This is no dream, no elaborate hoax. It is my voice, my future, spooling out on cheap plastic. Trapped, my gaze drifts between the player and the tapes. Sweat gathers on my forehead. The windows are secure. The next cassette beckons. Tomorrow night. Perhaps it holds a revelation, a path towards understanding. Or perhaps just another scene in a play I never auditioned for, whose ending I dread but cannot seem to rewrite. There appears to be no exit. Only play, listen, wait. My life fractured the moment I found those tapes in the dust and silence. It will never be whole again. The dissonance began with the sat-nav's chipper instruction. Approaching turn, Whisper Creek Path, 500 feet right. My gaze strained against the headlight beams slicing into absolute wilderness. Flanking the constricted asphalt ribbon, impenetrable woods pressed close, swallowing light. Whisper Creek Path. No such artery existed, only the void, tangled with timber and shadow. Hours had bled away since departing the unfamiliar city, its conference halls a fading memory. Home beckoned, a siren call promising familiar comforts, and in that eagerness, Elias had blindly ceded control to the digital oracle, embracing its promise of swift passage via a purported, faster route. Now marooned on this god-forsaken track, threading through nowhere, regret coiled cold in his gut. He eased off the accelerator, the car crawling. Ahead, only more serpentine road unfolded beneath the unwavering stare of the moonless night. The sat-nav pinged again, a maddening insistence on its phantom turn. With a ragged sigh, Elias nudged the vehicle onto the shoulder, loose stones chattering beneath the tires like nervous teeth. "Recalculating," it declared, oblivious or mocking. His phone felt heavy, useless in his hand. The screen glowed back, confirming his isolation. No service. Perfect. Utterly perfect. A measured breath, an attempt to quell the rising tide of panic. Reverse. Turn around. Retrace the path. Simple. As the headlamps scythed through the undergrowth during the clumsy three-point turn, a flicker, a disturbance in the periphery, halted him, foot suspended above the pedal. Nothing, just the furtive dance of shadows, the whisper of leaves disturbed by an unseen current. Imagination, he chided himself, shaking the creeping unease loose like water. He engaged drive, heading back the way he'd ostensibly come. Yet the landscape refused recognition. The asphalt coiled tighter, the trees loomed, a claustrophobic canopy sealing off the sky. His sat-nav, once insistent, now slept, its screen a vacant slate. Reboot attempts proved futile. This place, this forest, was a cartographic anomaly, seemingly erased from the digital world. Time dilated, stretching into an elastic eternity. 1 hour, then 2, slipped into the abyss of this unmappable wood. The main highway should have materialized long ago. Instead, only the relentless spiral of road remained, the needle of the fuel gauge plummeting towards empty. Fatigue began to fray the edges of his perception, blurring the line between reality and exhaustion's phantoms. Then, reflections bloomed in the rearview mirror, twin points of light, a surge of desperate hope, another soul adrift in this wilderness. But the hope curdled swiftly into disquiet. The lights possessed an aberrant quality, pallid, unnaturally spaced, less like headlamps, and more like something else. Elias pressed the accelerator. The lights mirrored his velocity. He slowed. They held their distance, spectral chaperones tethered to his bumper, always present, always watching. Sweat slicked his palms, his grip on the wheel a white-knuckled vice. Logic offered flimsy comfort. Perhaps another lost traveler, seeking guidance. But an instinct, primal and cold, screamed otherwise. The road convulsed into a hairpin bend. As Elias navigated the curve, his breath hitched, heart seizing in his chest. Directly ahead, illuminated starkly by his high beams, stood a silhouette. Brakes shrieked, rubber scoring asphalt as the car slewed sideways, halting mere feet from the obstacle. It resolved into the form of a woman, utterly motionless. A cascade of ink-black hair veiled her features, spilling over a gown of spectral white that seemed to phosphoresce under the harsh glare. Paralysis gripped him, breath shallow and ragged in the sudden thick silence. The figure remained statue still, seemingly devoid of respiration. Behind him, those pallid lights crept closer, twin embers in the oppressive dark. A tremor ran through his hand as it drifted towards the door latch, an inexplicable impulse. To offer aid, to plead for it. The instant his fingertips grazed the frigid metal, motion shattered the tableau. Her head snapped upwards with unnerving speed, the curtain of hair parting like a stage curtain, revealing unspeakable horrors. A choked cry tore from Elias's throat. Where eyes should have resided, there were only fathomless voids, abyssal pools of black. Her mouth stretched wide in a soundless shriek, revealing not human dentition, but rows of needle-sharp points, like a predator from forgotten depths. Instinct slammed the gear stick into reverse. Escape, anywhere but near. This. His foot stomped the accelerator. A choked cough from the engine. Then silence. Dead. The apparition, for what else could it be, took a hesitant step forward, then another. Its locomotion was disjointed, puppet-like, a hideous parody of grace performed by unseen strings. Again, Elias twisted the key. Futile. Again, silence. All the while, it advanced, closing the distance with that unnatural, jerky gait. And behind, the twin lights had swelled, now looming large in the mirror. Desperation drove him back to the phone. Still no network, but the screen itself was behaving erratically, the digital clock a frantic blur of cascading numerals, time itself unraveling. And in the dark glass, a reflection. The lights behind him resolved into not lamps, but eyes. A multitude of luminous, unblinking orbs suspended in the night, watching. It reached his window now, that bloodless mouth stretched into a rictus grin that promised oblivion. A hand lifted, skeletal fingers tipped with obsidian claws, and began to tap against the glass. Tick, tick, tick. Each impact birthed fine, radiating fractures across the safety glass. The barrier wouldn't hold. Panic surged, a tidal wave threatening to drown him. Elias squeezed his eyes shut, thoughts scrambling. Not real. A dream. Exhaustion's phantasm. He dug fingernails into his own flesh. A sharp sting of reality. A desperate anchor. "Wake!" he pleaded into the suffocating dark, the word a dry rasp. "Wake up! Please, wake up!" The tapping ceased. A fragile, terrifying silence descended. With trepidation that felt like physical weight, Elias peeled open his eyelids. Headlights streamed past, the familiar rumble of traffic. He was parked on the hard shoulder of a bustling highway, the mundane world rushing by in comforting streaks of light and sound. His sat-nav glowed reassuringly on the dashboard, displaying his precise location on a recognizable map. Was it merely a fever dream born of weariness, a waking nightmare conjured from the depths of isolation and fear? The frantic drumming in his chest gradually subsided. His gaze drifted to the passenger seat. Something lay there, alien against the pale upholstery. A single strand of hair, impossibly long, raven dark. The apparition's veiled face flashed in his mind, vivid and terrifying. A chill, colder than the night air, traced its way down his spine. With unsteady fingers he reached for it, half convinced it would dissolve into smoke or ash. But it was solid, coarse, undeniably real, between his trembling fingertips. He snatched his hand back as if scalded, the hair fluttering silently to the floor mat. The engine caught this time, roaring to life under his shaky touch. Merging back into the flow of traffic, Elias couldn't dispel the sensation of a narrow escape, of having brushed against something ancient and malevolent, something that might not yet be done with him. The ensuing weeks were steeped in residual dread. Every shadow seemed to lengthen unnaturally. Every night drive became an ordeal fraught with imagined perils. Maps were scrutinized with paranoid intensity. Shortcuts offered by technology were vehemently declined. Slowly, inevitably, the raw terror softened, blurring into the shape of a chilling anecdote, a story trotted out cautiously to elicit gasps, never quite believed, not even fully by himself. That strand of hair, he reasoned it away, a stray thread from somewhere, perhaps his own, despite the discrepancy in length and shade. Life, insistent and demanding, resumed its familiar cadence. Until months later, driving home late from another city, the car filled with the mundane drone of the engine and the low thrum of the radio. Then, the sat-nav chimed, that same, disturbingly upbeat electronic tone. "Approaching turn," it announced, the voice sickeningly familiar. "Whisper Creek Path, 500 feet right." Elias's pulse leaped, a frantic bird trapped in his ribs. To the right, where only unbroken darkness should have been, yawned the mouth of a track he'd never noticed on this route before. Narrow, twisting, vanishing into dense, watchful woods, and standing sentinel at its threshold, a silhouette limned by gloom, barely discernible, yet instantly recognizable, was the unmistakable shape of a figure in white. His foot remained steady on the accelerator. He passed the phantom turn without faltering, though his hands quaked on the wheel. A reflexive glance in the rearview mirror, and Elias could have sworn, just for an instant before the angle changed, he saw two faint, aberrant points of light detach themselves from the darkness and begin to pursue. What transpired on that impossible road remains shrouded, a terrifying enigma lodged deep in his memory like a shard of ice. Reality? Hallucination? Some shared delirium bleeding through the thin fabric of the world? He cannot say. But this Elias knows with chilling certainty. The digital guides we blindly follow can lead us far astray. Sometimes, the promised shortcut is a detour into nightmare, and sometimes, the paths avoided by others are shunned for reasons we are far, far safer not discovering. The very instant that dry, skittering sound whispered from within the plaster, I sensed our sanctuary was breached. What promised renewal for our fledgling family had warped into a waking dread, the hidden things behind the lath poised to emerge. My wife Clara and I had spent months adrift in the property market's turbulent sea. With our second child swelling beneath her heart, our city apartment, once cozy, now felt like a closing fist. Then, the listing for the old Sentinel on Hemlock Lane materialized. A spectral beauty, vast and attainable, its sprawling yard a future playground. It whispered possibility. The agent, a relentlessly cheerful Ms. Albright, pirouetted through the echoing rooms, her praise a constant murmur. "Such integrity," she'd chime, fingers tracing the elaborate scrollwork. "They simply don't build with this soul anymore." We were captured. Despite Clara's unease, the floorboards groaning like old bones, the attic air thick with the scent of forgotten decades. We surrendered our hopes that very afternoon. A week hence, the keys, cold metal promises, rested in our hands. Moving day unfurled in its customary whirlwind. Our 4-year-old Lily, a blur of joyous energy, christened her expansive new room by strewing toys like confetti amongst the stacked cartons. Clara, gravid and graceful at 7 months, orchestrated the movers' ballet, while I wrestled with flat-pack furniture, attempting to impose order on the beautiful chaos. Only later, under the cloak of night, after Lily slept soundly and Clara had succumbed to the day's demands, did the house exhale its first secret. I sat adrift in the living room, an archipelago of half-unpacked boxes surrounding me, when I registered it, a faint, insistent gnawing, somewhere deep within the wall's cavity. Mice, I reasoned initially, an old structure's unwelcome tenants. I mentally bookmarked the need for traps and turned back to the task at hand. Yet, as the hours bled towards dawn, the sounds grew bolder, imbued with unnerving purpose. This wasn't the random scurry of rodents. It felt larger, more deliberate. I pressed my ear to the cool plaster, straining to pinpoint the source, but silence answered my approach. A cunning, waiting stillness. By the time I finally sought my own bed, I'd almost managed to persuade myself it was merely the house settling into its ancient foundations. The ensuing days were a maelstrom of settling in, enrolling Lily in the local preschool. The unsettling acoustics receded, muffled by the mundane necessities of establishing a new life. Then, objects began their strange migration. Insignificant things. At first, a fountain pen vanished from my desk. A lone sock absconded from the laundry pile, easily dismissed amidst the unpacking detritus. But the disappearances escalated. Lily's beloved plush rabbit, Clementine. Clara's grandmother's silver locket, heavy with sentiment. My laptop. I know I left it right here on the kitchen island, I insisted one morning, the edge of frustration sharpening my voice as I scoured the surfaces for the missing machine. Clara offered a weary glance. You've likely just misplaced it, Elias. The house is still a labyrinth of boxes. It will surface. But it never surfaced, nor did Clementine nor the locket, and the noises, the furtive movements within the walls, intensified, becoming a nightly symphony of scratches, muffled thuds, and susurrations that brushed against the ear like half-formed words. Sleep became elusive. I'd lie rigid, cataloguing the house's secret dialogues. Clara, too, began to notice. I'd find her gaze fixed on a stretch of empty wall, brow furrowed. "Did you hear that?" she'd whisper, but my own straining ears would meet only profound quiet. Lily was the first to glimpse the phantom. She burst into our bedroom one night, a torrent of tears streaking her small face. "There's a man in my closet," she wailed, "watching me." We flew to her side, hearts hammering. Her room stood empty, ordinary, clothes and toys slumbering peacefully. We murmured reassurances, attributing the vision to the shadows of a bad dream. Yet the stark terror etched in her eyes lingered, a chilling premonition. A week after Lily's nocturnal fright, I resolved to unearth the truth. Clara had taken Lily for a checkup, granting me a solitary afternoon within the house's watchful embrace. I began my quest in the attic, that repository of dust and stillness, sifting through insulation and forgotten corners. For what, I wasn't entirely certain. Vermin? A hidden ingress? Any tangible clue to rationalize the growing unease? Just as defeat began to settle, my gaze snagged on an anomaly, a section of wall distinct from its aged neighbors, the paint subtly mismatched. A tremor of intuition passed through me. I rapped my knuckles against the surface. The hollow resonance confirmed it. Void lay beyond. My pulse quickened. Fetching a heavy sledgehammer from the garage felt like a transgression, a foolhardy impulse, yet the need to know eclipsed caution. Drawing a steadying breath, I swung. Plaster dust erupted as the wall yielded, crumbling inward to reveal a Stygian darkness. My flashlight beam sliced through the airborne particles, trembling in my grip. What it illuminated sent ice through my veins. A room, a cramped, clandestine chamber, nested within our home's very skeleton. And it was occupied. A grubby sleeping bag lay discarded on the floorboards, encircled by islands of our pilfered possessions. Lily's clementine, Clara's silver locket, my laptop. Everything lost, reclaimed, and hoarded. But the true horror resided on the opposite wall. Caught in the wavering circle of light was a disturbing collage. Photographs of us. Clara hanging washing, sunlight catching her hair. Lily absorbed in play on her bedroom floor. Me asleep and vulnerable on the living room sofa. Dozens of captured moments, intimate and uninvited, chronicling our lives since the day we moved in. I staggered back, the world tilting. Someone had been dwelling in the hidden arteries of our house, a silent observer, a collector of our lives. The comprehension struck like a physical blow. At that precise moment, the sound of the front door opening echoed from below. Clara's voice drifted up the stairwell. "Elias, we're back early. The doctor had a cancellation." Raw panic seized me. "Get them out, now!" Before I could react, another sound intruded. A floorboard creaking inside. The wall beside me. Then footsteps, rapid, light, descending within the hidden passage. "Clara!" I roared, already scrambling for the attic stairs. "Take Lily! Get out of the house! Go!" Her confused reply was lost as I plunged down the stairs, bursting into the upstairs hallway just as a shadowed figure flickered around the corner, heading towards the bedrooms. Instinct propelled me forward. I cornered him, unmistakably a man in Lily's room. He was wraith-thin, eyes wide and feral, in a gaunt face framed by matted hair. We froze, locked in mutual shock, hunter and hunted suddenly face to face. Then he bolted for the window. I tackled him. We crashed to the floor, a frantic knot of limbs. We wrestled amidst Lily's scattered toys, a desperate, silent struggle. Below, I could hear Clara's screams, sharp shards of terror fueling my resolve. A surge of adrenaline gave me the advantage. I pinned him beneath me. "Who are you?" I choked out, breath ragged, muscles straining to hold him fast. "What are you doing here?" His struggles ceased abruptly. A disconcerting calm settled over his features. "Not your house," he rasped, his voice dry and cracked from disuse. "Mine. Always been mine. You're the trespassers." Before I could process his words, the distant wail of sirens pierced the air. Clara had called the police. The sound registered on the man's face, igniting a fresh wave of panic. With startling, desperate strength, he tore free from my grip and launched himself towards the open window. I lunged, but he moved with a fluid, practiced speed. He was out, scrambling down the exterior drainpipe like a creature accustomed to vertical flight. By the time uniformed officers filled the house, he had dissolved into the neighborhood's shadows. The aftermath was a disorienting montage. Police reports, forensic teams dusting for prints, neighbors murmuring behind cupped hands. We learned his name, Silas Croft, son of the woman who had owned the house before us. He had inhabited its hidden spaces for years, a ghost in the machine, even after his mother's passing and the property's sale. The labyrinth of secret passages and concealed rooms he'd engineered was disturbingly extensive, granting him unseen access and constant surveillance. Remaining there was unthinkable. The violation, the stark awareness of our utter vulnerability, was a poison we couldn't stomach. We fled that same night, seeking refuge with friends while the fragments of our life settled. The ordeal carved deep fissures into our peace. Lily suffered nightmares for months. Clara developed a nervous vigilance, forever checking locks, her gaze constantly sweeping her surroundings. As for me, the gallery of stolen moments on that hidden wall remained seared into my memory, a testament to our profound exposure. Eventually, we found another place, a sterile new build devoid of history or hidden recesses, but the fear became our unwelcome lodger. Every creak of the floorboards, every temporarily misplaced object resurrects the chilling dread of those weeks on Hemlock Lane. The true horror, I've come to understand, wasn't merely Silas Croft. It was the obliteration of sanctuary, the shattering of the comforting myth that our homes are impermeable fortresses. Because now I know, with chilling certainty, that sometimes the walls possess eyes and ears and intentions entirely their own. So, as you sit in your own home, perhaps reading these words, pause for a moment. Listen, truly listen. Is that sound merely the structure settling around you? Or is it something else? Someone else? You can never be entirely sure who might be watching from the shadows within, waiting for their moment to step into the light. The stench assaulted first, caustic, synthetic, utterly alien. It coiled out the moment the warehouse door yielded, a noxious announcement that I'd trespassed into realms best left undisturbed. 6 months I'd haunted the graveyard shift at Apex Warehousing. Monotony was the currency, solvency the reward. 10 p.m. till dawn's grey crack, I traced the echoing perimeters of the colossal structure, guardian of slumbering commerce, secure, silent, utterly predictable, until that particular Tuesday. Midnight had just bled into Wednesday. My boots beat a lonely rhythm on the vast concrete expanse, the beam of my flashlight cutting cones of dust-moted light through the cavernous dark. Aisles soared skyward, monolithic shelves burdened with anonymous freight. By day, a frantic ballet of forklifts and shouts. By night, a tomb of stillness. Having just cleared the sprawling east wing, my eye snagged on an anomaly. Pale, watery light seeped from beneath the roller door of Bay 17. That bay, I knew, stood vacant, a hollow tooth in the warehouse's jaw, or so the manifests claimed. Drawn by a disquiet I couldn't name, I drifted closer, fingers brushing the reassuring weight of the radio clipped to my belt. The instant I eased the door open a crack, the foul air punched me, a volatile cocktail of sharp ammonia, acrid bleach, and something else, metallic and vaguely organic. My eyes streamed, a cough clawed at my throat. Through a watery haze, I swept the flashlight's beam inside. The sight froze the marrow in my bones. Improvised workbenches crammed the space, cluttered with glass flasks, serpentine tubing, heating elements, ghosts of high school chemistry labs, warped into something sinister. Dominating the center, a hulking contraption of stainless steel and coiled wires hissed and bubbled, a grotesque altar to illicit science. No leap of intellect was required. A drug factory, vast, sophisticated, thriving in the belly of my nightly patrol. My thoughts fragmented, scattering like startled birds. How long? Whose creation was this? And the question that hammered loudest, what impossible choice did I face now? Protocol screamed, "Waxwa! Police!" Yet a deeper instinct urged caution. This operation dwarfed petty street chemists. The sheer scale, the advanced apparatus, spoke of entrenched, organized power. An entity capable of nesting such a viper right here, under the indifferent gaze of security cameras and routine checks. How far did their tendrils reach? Paralyzed by the enormity of it, I registered a sound that turned my blood to ice, shuffling footsteps, deeper within the bay. Light extinguished. I melted behind a teetering stack of crated goods, breath held captive in my chest, praying the shadows would claim me. Two figures emerged from behind a plastic sheet partition. Even the gloom couldn't soften their menace. One, lean and reptilian, his arms a tapestry of ink. The other, a slab of muscle poured into human form, head shaved smooth, eyes like chips of obsidian. Their voices were low murmurs, venomous whispers I strained to decipher. Deliveries overdue, the old man's getting twitchy. Told you those Russians were unreliable, should have stayed with the Colombians. Yeah, well, their cut was better, and this stuff, purer than driven snow. Motionless, I became part of the inanimate clutter, the air thick with my own unbreathed fear. They stood squarely between me and freedom, oblivious architects of my potential demise. Their discussion meandered through logistics, territories, whispers of encroaching rivals vying for their poisonous market share. Each intercepted phrase added another layer to the crushing weight of my discovery. An eternity condensed into minutes passed before they finally retreated behind the partition. Only when their footfalls faded completely did I dare to move, limbs stiff, nerves screaming. I eased towards the door, a phantom gliding through hostile territory, slipping out and pulling the heavy door gently until the latch clicked, a sound as loud as a gunshot in the silence. Then I bolted. I didn't cease running until the relative sanctuary of the security office enclosed me, lungs burning, cold sweat plastering my shirt to my back. The lock snicked home. I sagged into the worn chair, the adrenaline receding, leaving a trembling void. The phone beckoned, the imperative to report undeniable. Yet as my hand hovered, a chilling logic intruded. This lab hadn't materialized overnight. Equipment, volatile chemicals, transport required trucks, personnel, access. Someone must have turned a blind eye, greased the wheels. What if the corruption wasn't just external? The thought landed like a physical blow. If Apex harbored a traitor who remained untainted, my supervisor, the day shift lead, trust became a luxury I could no longer afford. I sat suspended in that awful calculus for a long time. Alerting the authorities might trigger a purge, evidence incinerated, culprits vanished, maybe even silencing the witness. Silence, however, meant complicity, allowing this poison factory to flourish. I chose a third path: patience. Information was paramount, identifying allies essential. The remaining hours of my shift were a pantomime of normalcy, my mind a frantic labyrinth of suspicion and dread. At 6, I clocked out, but routine diverged. Instead of my apartment, I sought the anonymous haven of the public library. Hours bled away in front of flickering monitors, researching clandestine labs, organized crime syndicates, the perilous art of evidence collection. That night, I returned to Apex armed differently. A miniature camera, high resolution, nestled in my pocket. A digital voice recorder, equally discreet. Vigilance became my watchword. It wasn't long before the pattern emerged. Lenny, a forklift jockey on my shift, his movements always slightly furtive, made repeated, brief visits to Bay 17, each time a nervous scan of the surroundings before disappearing inside. I captured several grainy images from afar. Later, concealed by stacked pallets, I recorded fragments of his hushed phone call. Units, weight, drop points. The subsequent week unfolded as a tightrope walk over an abyss. I amassed my clandestine dossier, time-stamped photos, audio snippets, meticulous notes charting suspicious movements and personnel interactions. Caution was my shadow, paranoia my constant companion. Every shared glance felt like scrutiny, every unexpected cleaning of metal a potential threat. Sleep offered little refuge, fractured by phantom noises and imagined footsteps. After 2 weeks steeped in this corrosive fear, I judged my collection sufficient. The local constabulary felt too parochial, too susceptible to leaks in a town this size. My gamble lay with the State Bureau of Investigation, an anonymous digital package containing a curated selection of my findings was dispatched into the ether. Then came the waiting, each day an agonizing oscillation between hope for intervention and terror of discovery. It broke on a Friday, mid-shift. Suddenly, the warehouse wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the shadow figures swarming through the loading bays. Tactical gear, weapons held ready, disciplined silence. They moved like wraiths, sealing exits, methodically corralling startled employees. From the obscurity of a darkened aisle, I watched them breach Bay 17. Shouts erupted, followed by the unmistakable sounds of a brief, violent struggle. Lenny, face a mask of disbelief and fury, was marched out in restraints, along with several others I vaguely recognized. An agent, all sharp angles and authority, materialized beside me, badge briefly illuminated. "Sir, we have some questions for you." Relief, profound and debilitating, washed through me. It was done. The right thing, however perilous, had been done. The hours that followed dissolved into a haze of debriefings, formal statements. I recounted everything, surrendered my accumulated evidence. A grudging respect flickered in their professional eyes. "You walked a razor's edge. one agent remarked, his tone flat. "These aren't local players. This setup belongs to a cartel faction trying to muscle into the heartland. Finding out you were watching, they wouldn't have hesitated." The abstract danger solidified then, chilling me anew. I'd understood the risk, but hearing it quantified, realizing the lethal stakes I'd inadvertently played for, disaster had been breathing down my neck. My testimony, my furtive documentation, proved instrumental. It wasn't just the lab. My information helped fracture a significant node in the cartel's burgeoning regional network. Lives potentially saved, the agent suggested. Countless doses of poison kept off the streets. Pride should have been the dominant emotion. Instead, exhaustion and a lingering, deep-seated fear were my primary companions. The Bureau offered the standard package: relocation, erasure, a life scrubbed clean under a new identity, far from the Midwest's reach. A part of me railed against it, yearning for the mundane simplicity of my former existence. But the cartel's memory, I knew, would be long, their vengeance relentless. I accepted, vanished. Reinvention is a slow, uneven process. Days ache with the phantom limb of my forsaken life. Then, memory dredges up that night. The caustic reek, the sinister alchemy bubbling in the dark heart of the warehouse. I picture the unseen victims spared the poison brewed there. The cost of doing right was steep, yet necessary. Now, nestled in a coastal town where the Pacific sighs against the shore, I am merely another anonymous face. My neighbors know nothing of the man I was, nor the night that irrevocably altered my trajectory. But sometimes, a stray scent catches the breeze. Chemical, sharp, fundamentally wrong. And I am instantly transported back to that echoing vastness. A stark reminder that the most virulent dangers often fester quietly, hidden in the places we see every day.